Hello! Just to say, I do have a puppy to my side. I'm not strangely stroking the chair. It'd be an odd thing to start the session with, although ASMR-y kind of stuff. I guess that some people might find that helpful. I don't know. I don't know whether you like ASMR, guys. I actually find it really disconcerting and strange. I fit into that quotient of percentage that just doesn't connect, whereas I do know a lot of people find it incredibly euphoric. I, however, find it a little bit on the disturbing side. I'm not going to lie. Horses for courses and all that, horses for courses. We should always introduce a cute puppy because that will make everybody immediately feel better, even if you're not a dog person, because this is more of a Mowgli or a, what were they called, gremlins before you fed them when they were nice. Mogwai, not a Mowgli. That's that.
Mowgli's sort of a Jungle Book.
Jungle Book, totally different character. Different animal, full stop, and all of those things.
Human.
Yes, a human. Feels the need to correct me. Also, I'm going to warn you that there is a cat in here, and the cat may make an appearance at some moment in time. Also, just so you're aware, my lovely other half, who's been having one of those days today, because it's been a busy day, chaps, hasn't put the screen on in front of me, so I can't actually read any of the questions at this moment in time. But because I'm a true professional, and obviously I'm heavily trained in how to manage anxious situations, I'm just talking through it. He's now staggering around to the front, looking like a dishevelled, strange, overworked human. And he's trying desperately to play with some levers and some pulleys and some knobs. I don't know.
Where am I? Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Do you know what? I nearly leant forward then and I nearly hit you across the head for fun. And I thought, well, that'll be it then. Twitter will be awry with, oh, she's an abuser.
I look like a homeless
You know how it
fisherman.
goes. You don't look like a homeless fisherman, but you do look like a fisherman. There's nothing wrong with looking like a weathered fisherman.
A weathered fisherman then, yeah.
Although he obviously would not be allowed to bring any fish unless they were alive, because that would be against my values. It's all on now. We were just going to do it on YouTube tonight because we're trying to streamline it, and also because then the chat's all in one place. But at the last minute, I just said, can we try and get back up on Facebook? So we're on Facebook as well, for those of you who tend to join through Facebook. Also, Katie's probably watching. Usually watches on Twitter, I think. But if you're watching, Katie, happy birthday for tomorrow. I've stopped celebrating birthdays. I'm doing a Benjamin Button. I've decided that I'm just going to go the opposite way from now on. I want to be called Emma and I want to be 26. And nobody's allowed to challenge me because that would offend me. Unless you watch my YouTube, in which case I say risk offending people all the time. That's irrelevant. We're on a mental health area. We can change that transition. Right, I'm going to start in a second. It's lovely to see you all. Oh, hi, Nick. You're not in a good place. And let's see that one. I'm not in a good place at the moment. I feel really low at the moment. I can't do anything. It's my dizziness is really bad. Obviously, I've not seen whether there are comments above about your dizziness. Is your dizziness to do with an inner ear infection, or have you got vertigo, or is it to do with medication? Because obviously I'm not medical, but I do understand those kind of issues and how they can impact on mental health. It can feel really awful, those scenarios. And obviously anything that can kind of bring a level of balance to the body is really important. The other thing is if you're feeling dizzy because maybe you're going through some kind of depersonalization or derealization, because you're hyper anxious, so maybe you've been over breathing, that's going to make you really, really dizzy. Because what needs to happen is we need to have the right amount of CO2, carbon dioxide, in our lungs as well as oxygen. And what happens when we get really anxious is we start thinking we can't breathe, and then we start over breathing, we start gasping or trying to take really deep breaths, and that prevents the regulation of the right amount of CO2 and O2 levels in our blood system and in our brain. And it makes us literally feel like we might faint, or sometimes we feel like we're all curled up and we can't move properly. It makes people collapse, it makes people feel like they're having a heart attack. So if it's that, then it comes down to making sure you use some breathing exercises that are really helpful. And that can be something like the 4-7-8 technique, which is really good. That's inhale for the nose through 4, hold for 7, breathe out through the mouth for 8. It's quite hard, not gonna lie. It makes you go, I don't know whether I can breathe anymore, but I promise you, you won't be able to carry on having that panic attack or anxiety whilst you're doing that. It will regulate your breathing. No idea, not ear issue, not medications, so still no idea. It started when I was whacked in the head in 2008. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you there. If in 2008 you got a big whack in the head, it could be that you've genuinely had some kind of brain damage and you should have had an MRI or a CAT or a PET scan, something that can actually look inside your brain and see whether there is any impairment. Now, it could be that that isn't anything to do with something that's specifically physical, but arguably if you have a big whack on your head, it can also affect your ear. And your ear is a very delicate area, and unfortunately, if something impacts on it, then it can cause things like dizziness. But then there's the other side of that, which is the psychological, and the psychological is if you go through some kind of traumatic episode, there can be ramifications. So arguably, if you've been whacked in the head in 2008, it can be pretty traumatic. And that could mean that sometimes things feel a bit chaotic and out of control, and that could be why you're feeling this kind of dizziness as well. It's all of those things. The thing for me is I'm definitely a meditate more than medicate person. When I lost my dad, the doctors rang me that day and said, we want you to go on antidepressants, and the answer was a clear no. I like to make sure that I'm processing my feelings, and for some people it's imperative that they go on antidepressants at certain points. For me, I work very hard around kind of bringing an understanding about my body-mind balance, and for me at that point I needed to really be aware of what was going on in my body and my mind and dealing with the grief accordingly. But if I was whacked in the head, even though I am one of those people who like to process everything emotionally, I like to feel my feelings, even the ones that are dire and diabolical and tragic, I like them. I feel that they're really important to me. If I'd been whacked in the head, honestly, I'd have been straight at my doctors and be like, I'm dizzy a lot, can you please get me sorted out with a scan? Because you can't see inside it, and with those kind of imaging scans that they have now, they can see an amazing amount of information, an array of information. And before I start thinking about, well, am I depressed? Am I dealing with some PTSD? Am I highly anxious? Has some kind of mental illness arrived? Am I dealing with a mental health issue? Before I arrived at any of those questions, I would want to know physiologically whether there was something going on either in my inner ear, in my orbital area, so to do with my vision, etc., or of course in my brain itself, just so I can discount it. And once you discount it, then you can look at everything else. That said, you should definitely do the breathing exercises and some meditation. You have to excuse me being a bit sniffly. I've had one of those 1980s colds. Do you know, the type of thing that you had all the time in the 1980s and 1990s? I used to go to work, would you believe, and people would have tissue, they'd be blowing their nose, they'd be sneezing, they'd have streaming eyes, and I wouldn't bat an eyelid. And that's what I've been like when I've not been so well in the last week. Just one of those colds. But the ramifications of that are a bit of a croaky throat, a bit of a sniffly nose, you know, a bit of a chesty cough, who'd have thought it? And what do I do to help the mental health regarding my daughter? So first of all, how old's your daughter? That would be helpful for me to know. Secondly, one of the most difficult and challenging experiences, personally, I feel, both in practice, and young people were my massive area for many, many years, and I still have a deep, deep affinity with younger populations because I genuinely see how much better we need to help them traverse life. And, you know, it's challenging right now to be young. It's challenging to be old as well, with respect, certainly with the economy. She's 11 years of age, okay. So first off, again, when it comes down to an 11-year-old starting with mental health issues, it's always going to be a little bit of me that's like, well, 11 is a really transitory age for an 11-year-old female. There are so many shifts physiologically. I mean, basically, we all know as women it should be banned. We should just be allowed to avoid any of that, be handed our babies, because it's quite a lot of challenges stuff for going on at that point. But you know, you're 11, your hormones are shifting and changing. You're having to confront growing up, particularly if you've gone to secondary school and you're in a situation where suddenly you've got all these older people around you who seem like a million years older, or arguably in your final year of primary school, when you know that it's coming to an end of that relatively safe environment. And unlike when I was a child and you were a child, when social media really wasn't something that existed, we didn't really know what was going to happen next. I mean, I'm sure that most of you listening who are my age, 29 or whatever, but my age, and social media wasn't as big, just think back. Arguably, you might go and visit your high school. Often we didn't. Certainly I didn't. You know, you just arrive where you arrive, and it's like, Jesus, who are these 29-year-old girls or boys walking around? That's how you felt. So your first confrontation of being that developing young prepubescent to pubescent was going into those environments for the first time. Nowadays at 11, you're like seeing the world through this lens. And also, I'm not judging you at all if your child has got access to social media. The average child has a smartphone at 7 years of age. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that a lot of people do allow their children to have access, or they're online seeing other things. And because of that, the world for them is so huge. So if you think about the developing brain, and often we don't do this because we are told what is good. Right? We are told, and this isn't just for children, this is for all of us. You're handed this blueprint of this is what everybody should have, this is what everybody should do. And the fact that it's the most broken blueprint that's ever been out there, think about it. Think about all the problems that we've got. I mean, mental health per se in the UK is at a crashing low in so many areas, including young people. But we've been handed this blueprint of what we're meant to do and what we're meant to have. A lot of screen time, a lot of comparing ourselves with others, a lot of pressure to do well in exams, a lot of constantly thinking about how we act so that we don't upset or offend other people. And it's like a minefield. And then shove all of that into an 11-year-old's head. Now, some 11-year-olds get super lucky. They do. They get born with a brash, sometimes overconfident personality temperament. They're just naturally inclined that way. And even when the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune hurt them, maybe they're born to a nasty piece of work as a parent, they've still got this just temperament that's really resilient and maybe a little bit on the arrogant side, but it's okay because that helps them get through, right? And these kids go through some pretty tumultuous times, but still this robustness that they're born with, and it makes them a bit of an arse sometimes, but you know, it helps them to navigate that. And they just naturally have an easier time, not simple, but easier. But the vast majority of young people are born, you know, with sensitive temperaments or somewhere in between, and then they're having to function and focus and manage all of these huge and wide and wild transitions that's constantly fed to them. I mean, if you think about marketing and how our children are these days, believe me, it's the job of a marketer to basically chip away at your child's self-esteem, ideally for the rest of their life, and then sell it back to them piece by piece forever. That's what you want to do as a marketer, get them young, keep them all the way through their lives. That's how you make money, right? And I'm not even being nasty to marketers, so that's the game, that's the way it works. But is that good? And how's that impacting on our children? So imagine being that 11-year-old, you know, you're not living in the 80s anymore. You're not living in the early 90s anymore, where even though poverty existed, you felt a lot more like your neighbours were going through the same. You're now looking online at the rich kids of Instagram and Miley Cyrus and all these other pop stars. You've got your YouTubers, you've got your Instagrammers, you've got your Insta famous. And you're like sitting there thinking, I don't know who I am or what I want, or who I want to be. But I'm 11 and I'm starting to have these feelings and I want relationships and I'm interested in boys or girls, and I'm being told what I'm allowed to say and what I'm allowed to think and what I'm not allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to think. This has been crushing for our children, in my opinion, and that's professionally as much as personally as a parent. To be 11, we need to bring it back to how do we help a child's mental health at 11? We help the child be 11. It's something that is sorely being missed in our society. We help our child see that the pressures they are carrying are often not their own. We help our child understand that the burden that they carry has been given to them, handed piece by piece by so many others, and often isn't something they even need to hold on to. We allow them to really connect with the fact that, listen, they are 11, they know nothing, and that's great. We help them understand that because they're constantly being told by everybody, I mean, excuse me for blaspheming, but Jesus Christ, I don't need my kid at 11 to be worried about the world ending or the way that somebody feels offended. I don't want any of that. I want my child at 11 to experience presence. I want them to understand what it's like to connect with nature. I want them to understand what kindness is without being forced by the throat and told what they should like, what they shouldn't like, who they should speak to, who they should ignore. I don't want any of that. As a parent, I want to bring them clarity. They're going to have all this confusion forced on them. They're going to be told by teachers what they should apologise for. They're going to be told by teachers what they're meant to aspire to. They're going to be told by peers they're not good enough. Or they're going to be told by peers that they're admired, and that's confusing. There's all these things going on. So as a parent, you bring them clarity. You help them understand, as my children did when they were 11, you know nothing, and I am so glad that you know nothing, because we are at the beginning of even the first atom of understanding who you're going to be. And you help them understand hormones. You say, hey, you can feel really sad sometimes. A thing for you all to do, go on Google and write, I feel sad. You know what? You get pages on depression. Pages on depression. So when your kid is feeling sad at 11, like every kid does at 11, like every human being does throughout their life. I mean, newsflash, why aren't we talking about the reality of that? We feel sad. And sometimes we feel happy, sad, distressed, joyful in 1 week. That doesn't make it pathologized, right? But if you look on Google and you say, I feel sad, you get to like page 3 before we're talking about sadness. Everything's depression, depression, depression. So your child is looking and they're thinking, maybe I'm depressed. And you give them clarity. I keep coming back to that. You help sit them down and understand this is all to play for. Life is an exciting journey. It's full of suffering. It's full of loss, and that's okay. We figure that out as we move through it. You help them concentrate on what they have power over. That could be as simple as, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go outside and we're going to plant some sunflower seeds, and we're going to watch them grow in the next few months. I'm going to see whose sunflower seed gets to be the biggest sunflower, because we're going to show them how life is incredible and yet beautiful and yet fleeting. We can do all of those things. We can make sure that we make their home a haven to their friends. We can allow them to digitally detox regularly. We can help them to understand the vocabulary of emotion. I can't express, in fact I wrote my closer column today on it, just talking about a lot of families screaming at each other, and it's really not going to get you anywhere. So trying to help people understand and coordinate how they can teach children from a young age how to express themselves. Language and words, wow, the power. And this again is for everybody, because if you don't know how to use a word to express emotion, you can't express the emotion. It's as simple as that. If all I know is I'm angry, I'm frustrated, or I'm hurt, I'll react most of the time with a certain set of responses, like throwing something or screaming at somebody. If I realise that actually I feel really hurt and humiliated and ashamed and embarrassed and small and I don't feel valued, these are all words that you can teach your child now. She's 11. So you can literally get some flashcards and you can sit with her on an evening and you can be like, let's talk about these different feelings. And when people are like, well, why would you need to do that? And believe me, I've heard it a million times. You know, I've heard it a million times working with young offenders, with the parents, when I'm trying to teach compassionate parenting, and it will be like, they're never going to want to do this. And it's like, no, they're not. Because it doesn't feel cool at 11 to sit down and talk about what humiliation is like, but it's not about now. It's about teaching them and equipping them. So help them with that as well. The most important thing about your 11-year-old is you are a loving parent. Anybody who comes on something like this and asks for that, it comes from a place of deep compassion and love. So first of all, they have the stability, the security, and the foundation that so many children crave. And from that comes great things. I know it's not perfect science. I appreciate that great things happen to bad people and bad things happen to great families. It happens, right? But you're asking those questions at this age, and that's really, really helpful. But clarity, bring it down to the basics, get her out on walks, do family fun things, tell her to be crazy and fun, get her to play. Playfulness in 11-year-olds is ending, and it's a crisis because they don't think it's cool. They don't think it's acceptable. You know, they don't run around like aeroplanes anymore. They don't fantasy play. Geez, when I was 11, I was still playing Lego with my brother who was 4 years younger than me. I created worlds in our pond. I say it was a pond, it was more like a mud pit, but nonetheless, it was a pond in my imagination. Clarity. And the other thing I'd say is, of course, look, if you've got a child who's harming or eating disorders or anything like that, definitely get referred. But understand that the most important pin in anything, any bit of equipment, any cycle of, engineering, anything like that, any tiny pin that's important is the foundation of love, and you've got that. So just know that you know her better than anybody else will. But she's just got all this stuff shoved into her head, and you have to help her unravel that and make sense of it. That's your job. And don't think that it's the same for her now as it was for you then, and don't panic, because it's not the same for her now as it was for you then. And that's probably where the fear comes in, because you'll be like, God, why does she seem so complex? Why is this so dark and deep and scary? It's because it's a much darker, deeper, scarier time. That's why for kids, because we've really opened Pandora's box of possibility for them without understanding the limitations that they should have had placed upon them. And we now have to backpedal and help them understand that they're not responsible for global warming. They're not responsible for politically being correct and getting everything right and not offending the wrong person. They're confused, and it's adults who've confused them, and we should be ashamed. So now we have to backpedal and help them understand how to feel safer. And so it's not just your daughter, is what I'm saying as well. I cannot express to you how many educators I'm working with, how many people I'm speaking to about this. It's huge, all right? It's not just your daughter. So also feel secure in knowing that. And don't feel afraid to have that conversation with other mums and dads as well, because there'll be a lot who get it. And as I always say, like I'm always going to say this, I've been to the gym today. My son's just come back from Thai boxing. He's going to gymnastics tomorrow. We do a lot of stuff that is all about connecting with presence and fitness, and those things, they make a big difference. So try and get her involved in that respect as well. If she's getting bullied, get her into martial arts. I swear to you, sensitive temperaments, martial arts does them a world of good. What can I do? Sorry, by the way, I went on a lot about that, but there's a lot of parents who come on here, and I have a real anger because I understand my emotional vocabulary. I know what lies beneath my anger. It is a disrespect, a full disdain for what we have done to children recently and in the past probably 15 years. I have a disdain for it. We are stealing childhood. We are breaking down the opportunity to create unique little human beings who grow into incredible game changers and world leaders and all of those things. And I can tell you that because the amount of kids that go from ordinary, like box standard lives like the one I've provided for my boys into politics or being barristers or doing things that, let's just say, a certain class of people just seem to swan into. That's because they're taught limits by factors that they shouldn't be taught limits by. And it's our job to help free them and liberate them from that, to make them see that they're not just on a conveyor belt. That's a conveyor belt somebody else created and doesn't exist. That's how you get a happy human, all right? That's my experience anyway. What can I do to help myself? I'm heading towards a breakdown due to having taken a non-molestation order out on an ex. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you've taken the non-molestation order out on an ex and you still have feelings for that person, and the fact that you've got that power situation where there's a legal process is making you feel really frustrated and really divided about your actions. And arguably, I can completely understand if you feel love for somebody, if they've harmed you, it's very difficult to get people to be empathetic to that, because understandably you'll have great meaning to people and that person will have deserved a non-molestation order, and the consequence of that is that you're now struggling, potentially balancing that. You have to create distance. It's like anything, isn't it? When I was a kid, I used to really get annoyed with that statement of time heals. In fact, I remember when I was training in therapy, the first degree after I did my psychology degree, and one of the things that they said you must never say to people is that time heals. And it's really strange for me because I've been through some really serious tragedies, and time creates a distance between you and it And whilst one can argue that doesn't heal it because it still exists within your experience and your psyche, it soothes to some degree. It allows you a reflection as much as a introspection about that as well, all of those things, but it certainly is useful. And so I'm not saying that time will heal this rift for you inside with the push and pull that you have because you've got this ex that you don't want in your life on one level but then you want in your life on another. It's distance that will make the biggest change, and not having sight of them, not seeing them, not having contact with them at all, which is obviously what the order's about, but that doesn't make it easy. And the more that you can do that, and the greater the distance becomes, and the more you open your social experience to the potential of meeting other people. I'm not just talking about in a loving way, I'm not talking about in an intimate relationship, I'm talking about just meeting people, broadening your horizon, connecting with other human beings, and just being open to the possibility and process that you deserve more. Then in time, you will acknowledge that what you did was the right thing. The problem is if you have really low self-esteem, and sometimes people who've been in abusive situations are so convinced that they will never get better that they don't see that they've just learned to accept scraps. And I mean that. If you've not got healthy self-esteem, if you don't think you're valuable, then you'll just accept whatever you're given because it's better than not having anything right. But actually, no, it's worse than anything, accepting scraps. It just confirms the bias that you're already carrying, that you're worthless, that you don't have value. The way to really transition from that position of low self-esteem to a sense of high value and worth is to know that, you know, you're precious, you're unique, you've got all of this incredible compassion and love to offer somebody else, and you offer it without being abused, you offer it without being hurt, you offer it without being harmed. Abusers abuse because they don't value you. They value their feelings, they value their reaction, they value the things that they need to do for themselves to manage their emotions, and they do that inappropriately. That's why women and men end up dead, because their partners decide that they're not a person of value and they're a person who has rage that needs to be projected somewhere. So you've done the right thing, but just because we've done the right thing doesn't mean that it feels right. A lot of us do the right thing. Like, let me give you an example. It's a really simple example, right? But it's one that most of us will be able to reflect and connect with. From a really early age, doesn't matter whether we're doing the right thing or otherwise, things can feel wholly opposite to that when we do it. And a great example is at school, when somebody does something really nasty to somebody else, but they're your friend. They might steal something off somebody, they might punch somebody in the face, they might bully somebody, and like it comes down to it, and you don't want to grass on your mate, but you know you're just going to have that conversation. You have that conversation with a teacher, you have that conversation with a parent, and it hurts because you don't want to betray your friend, but you also know it's not right to support them. So as early as that, we know that we can do something that's really good that feels really bad. We still do what's really good because it's the right thing to do. To bring in the quote that I always say that my father taught me, the right way is rarely the easy way, but it's the right way nonetheless, and it absolutely is. You do it anyway, that's what you're doing. Just stick with it. I've been widowed for over 6 years, and I get at times really depressed. Any suggestions? First of all, I'm really sorry that you've been a widow for 6 years. It's hard when you're in a relationship, and there'll be lots of people right now listening who've been in relationships, living in relationships now, and the idea of suddenly waking up and the person that they share their life with, the person that they pay the bills with, the person that drives them mad at times, the person that soothes them at times, is just no longer there and just disappeared, because you are sharing an enormous part, an inordinate part of who you are. And to have that taken away from you, it's not just painful, it's not just lonely, it's not just grief striking, it's just completely transformative life-wise. So you're at 6 years. Listen, probably the most honest professor I ever had the pleasure of listening to when we're all taught about grief and, you know, sorry guys, I'm going to swear, but the bullshit about this linear process that we're all going to go up through and it's going to be fine and we'll all be able to laugh about them in the end, that kind of thing that you get told, and you're imagining that 12 to 2 years down the line you'll be fine, and you're in a grief process and you're like, well, this is a massive lie. And I remember listening to this particular professor, and he said that 7 years is around their academic experience, their research experience of actually watching people go through the process to a point where that individual is no longer, as they said, broken by the memory. And I think that's a really powerful statement, and for me it's something I've carried my entire career, that maybe 7 years after a really significant loss, and yours is a highly significant loss, it's the life partner, then not being broken by the memory will be something that you'll harbour the potential of holding. But at 6 years, you're probably still just coming out of that, what happened to my life mark. So I don't want to underestimate that, because the idea that you can't still be depressed in a reactive manner to loss at this point would be wrong of me to say. It's absolutely possible to be depressed as a widow 6 years down the line because of the death of your partner. You're replanning, you're redefining. Life was not meant to end in the way it did for him. So now it's like you're on your own, and what does that say? Listen, personally for me, I think sometimes we feel depressed because we're not connected. In fact, I think there are two things that make people more depressed than anything else. One is that they don't have a lot of responsibility and purpose, and I put them together. You have to have those to have any meaning in the world. So you have to feel that what you do matters. So on one level it's like, okay, look at your life now, where you are. Do you enjoy what you do? Does it matter to you, and do you feel it has meaning and matter to the world? And if not, then you need more of that. And that could be that you go and train to work for crews because they're a bereavement specialist and you know your stuff because you've lived it. You might go and do some volunteer work in a support group for people who've just been bereaved. Things that you're kind of an expert on now. And you can't ever really be an expert until you've been through something that's that poignant and that painful and that awakening. So that'd be one thing. And the other thing is, and this isn't to patronise you, and it's certainly not to minimise loss in any way. Anybody who comes here knows that's not me. I don't minimise loss at all. But loneliness, depression feels empty. It feels heavy, it feels devastating, it feels diabolically heavy and gross in so many ways and limiting, but it's also really empty sometimes. It feels really empty. And it can make you feel so isolated and abandoned. And you can even be surrounded by people and you can still feel all those feelings because there's a space in you that isn't just about you. If you've been in a relationship for a long period of time, you're successful at relationships and you had a loving partnership with your husband, and that's a successful relationship defined there. It ended too early, but you're naturally good at relationships. And it could be that there is an awakening in you that this isn't just how you want to live, and that maybe there is a need for you to be open to the potential and possibility of meeting other people, meeting a potential companion. And that can be really troubling, because when people are married and they're in love and then their partner dies, often we still feel married and in love, and we feel like we're betraying the person that we love. And then that cycle is, well, if I betray them, I'm a terrible person, therefore I must remain sad and lonely because then I don't betray them and then I show that I love them. And how hard is it to kind of step outside of that and be like, it's okay for me to be happier. I deserve that. And my partner would have, above everything else, wished for me to also be happier. And my sister would always say, well, if her husband died, he'd always know that actually she'd always argue that she'd come back and just totally haunt him if he dared to go off and meet somebody else. But it's a joke, because the truth is that we want more for our partners often than we do for ourselves. So I'm not saying that's definitely a reason for your feeling. I'm saying it would make sense if that was a feeling, and that it would be okay for you to have that feeling and to still see that you deserved to open the door to possibility of partnership. So they would be the two main things. And of course, look, the other thing I'd say is, as I always do, you can always go and see your GP and have a conversation with them about that. Might be that you need some therapeutic conversations with somebody. There's medication. I think with grief, it's a process. And it sounds to me like you've done really well to get 6 years down the line, but there's something just missing. And maybe you need to start having those conversations with yourself about what you deserve and opening those possibilities to the potential new companionship, knowing that you're not betraying anybody. In fact, you're doing the opposite. You're embracing the beauty of life whilst enduring the reality of loss. And that's a balance and a tightrope that we all have to walk. I laugh and I joke and I have fun. And I know that once upon a time when I first lost my dad, I felt that would be betrayal. That if I ever smiled again, I ever imagined what it would be like to enjoy eating and watch a comedy and not feel like I was completely dead inside, that would be a betrayal. And then you learn over time that it's quite the contrary, that people who really love you, more than anything, they want your best interest met. Still processing emotionally after realising that a group of people I thought were real friends were just using me for their own benefit, but have now ghosted me when their benefits came to an end. Do you know what's really interesting? My other column for Closer, for those of you who don't know, I've written for Closer magazine for 10 years, and it was actually on ghosting. So ironically, it was on not just dating ghosting, it was about professional ghosting and just ghosting in general. Where you think you've got a relationship with people and then all of a sudden they just disappear. And I was kind of going through the reasons behind it. Now, when it comes down to friends, one of the things that it can be is, as you've identified, and it's great that you've identified this, that there can be groups of people who are predatory and they exploit you for their own purposes, and once they've got whatever it is they want, they abandon you. And that's really tough, because arguably you sit there and the same question goes through your head, which is, but what is that about me? Why abandon me? And what you'll do is you'll have your vision and your perspective of how you treat people, and because it's so outside of the realms of reality in comparison to the way that they treated you, you imagine that, maybe it is just that there's something wrong with me. And you have to step to the side of that and be like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. I can identify a reasoning as to why they chose me, because I was vulnerable and sensitive and open and kind and compassionate, and that made me vulnerable. And they saw something that I had that they wanted, and then they got that, and then they withdrew. That's exactly the same cycle that people experience when they're conned. So, ironically, as much as people often think, let's take a romance con, usually women who are attacked by romance cons, because women tend to be more agreeable, we let people into our lives and we trust them more. And unfortunately, these con artists, particularly in the sweat rooms, where it's all about trying to exploit women of loads of money, goes ahead, there's this idea that we'd have to be stupid. No, actually, the reality is intelligence works against you. If you have a higher IQ, the chances are that you believe you're clever because, in your life you've been successful, you make good decisions. So when this person just comes in and cons you, you end up thinking you'd never be somebody who was taken by that ruse, and that makes you vulnerable. That's what these people do. You're not the problem here. Yeah, you need to tighten your boundaries, and you certainly need to be more discerning around who you invite into your world. But we all have to go through learning that. Everybody listening to this right now will have an occasion where somebody they were probably even warned about walked into their life, and everyone was like, don't go near that person, they'll do A, B or C, and you're like, nah, they're really nice. And then, your purse has been stolen, or you got dumped whilst they were sleeping with somebody else, and the list goes on and on and on, right? So it happens to the best of us. It's more now saying, how am I going to tighten up my boundaries and have higher levels of expectation, so that when I use all of the resources and skills that I have to create better friendships and more equal friendships, that I can see if there are any warning signs. You need to strategize now. You need to go away and you need to sit down. You need to be like, what were the red flags? Because there'll have been lots. and you'll have been forgiving, and you'll have been compassionate, and you'll have turned your head, and you'll have been like, let me just think better about this person, but there'll have been red flags. You need to figure those out now. And they're helpful. Life is a journey, it's a process of learning. We're all doing it constantly. Most of us are walking like 5 feet and then we fall directly onto the concrete with our face. That's what we do in life. And then we get up and then we carry on and it happens again. And every time we just refine ourselves a little bit. And in the end, we still fall over. It's just we've created some kind of padding so that when we hit the ground, it doesn't hurt quite as much. We learn enough to do that. So don't beat yourself up. Don't feel stupid. Don't feel like a fool. It's a lesson. All the pain is always a lesson. It's just disguised in pain, so to speak, right? So now figure out what were the red flags. Tighten up the boundaries. Make sure you don't open your door to everybody, but certainly don't become bitter or hostile or abandoning of relationships. We get good ones, we get bad ones, we get deeply average ones, right? You'll cull some, you'll create some, you'll let some kind of be, and then they'll just disappear. But in the end, it will be okay. And on a general level for ghosting, for any of you who have gone through it, my advice is always the same. If you feel that maybe you haven't ended the kind of connection and you're unsure and you need to have clarification, I always say 2 messages, be very specific about the contact that you want, and then the second message is just oh, I see that we've come to the end of this friendship, you take care, I wish you well, as long as you haven't been exploited, obviously, because what you want to do is you want to create psychological closure for yourself. People ghost for a lot of reasons. Like, people will ghost because they don't want to deliver bad news. People will ghost because they can't give you what you think you want. People will ghost because they've got what they need. People will ghost because they're damn rude and they're just not very nice people. There's a whole group of the population who are just disagreeable arses, if I'm honest. So they'll be the kind. In fact, the journalist who I work with when I'm doing my closer post, I usually make a joke when I'm writing my closer post, but it was true. I was like, I've worked in the media for 14 years. You don't get to work with a more rude group of people than you do in the media. So if I don't get ghosted every week, there's something seriously wrong. It's full of toxicity. And they wrote back and were like, I get ghosted every day professionally. And it's just, it takes a certain type of people to be in certain jobs. Sometimes you have to not take it personally and just be like, this is just the area that I work in or the life that I'm leading and the people that I'm entertaining at this moment in time. Don't lose sight of the fact that when it comes down to ghosting, on the whole, it's definitely them and absolutely not you. I know that's usually the opposite that we say in relationships, because when a relationship ends and they're like, it's not you, it's me, you're like, well, it's clearly me. Because you're definitely ending the relationship with me, so it's not me, why would you be ending the relationship? But when it comes down to ghosting, it's definitely them. And they're either inconsiderate nature or their inability to deal with conflicts and confront the issue of endings. Hi Emma, hope you feel well soon. I'm fine. I'm genuinely fine. I'm just getting past the old guitar stage. Do you remember when we used to have guitar as well? We used to talk about all these things that normally, didn't we? You might watch TV and there'd be an advert on about guitar. People would be like, oh, I can go and get some of that if I've got a bit of a chesty cold. Nowadays, it doesn't exist, does it? Just don't talk about it. Like your tunes, lockets, the lot. All of those. When I was a kid, they had extra strong mints and they had an advert where it said that it would blow your gloves off or that kind of thing. And then they had to stop saying that because the Advertising Standards Agency said that sucking a mint couldn't literally blow your socks or your gloves off, just in case any of us had bought them and imagined that was being a quick way to remove our mittens or our trainers. Who knew? Mind you, they did used to say 1 mile a day can help you work, rest and play. That was actually a lie, but nonetheless. Yorkie was just for men as well. But the point is, when did we lose our sight of irony, guys? Is it just me? No, it's not. It's anybody with a sense of humour and an ounce of ration with a dash of logic. Hi Emma, hope you're well soon. I was seeing a mental health nurse for 6 months but discharged me from the services. I still feel depressed, stressed, and I feel I don't want to be here anymore. Any suggestions, Emma, please? First of all, right, being discharged can feel like an oxymoron to some degree, like a complete juxtaposition of where you are. So you will not feel well on the whole when you're discharged from mental health nursing, even from therapy. Psychiatrists will often discharge you and you'll be like, I just do not feel well, but you won't feel as ill as you did. And that can be really hard to get your head around. Believe me, today I literally got the phone put down on me by somebody because I was putting a complaint in to the General Medical Council about the treatment of somebody who's very important to me. And I don't raise my voice, ever. I just express discontent in a very grown-up way. And I just literally got the phone put down on me. And sometimes the NHS can feel that way, literally. It can feel like expressing how you feel is just not tolerated. Or when you're not feeling well, there still doesn't seem to be, shall we say, a treatment plan that feels that it's working for you. And it feels like that's a little bit where you are right now. So there are different things that I would suggest. So first of all, most people when they're discharged from serious services, like it might be, the fact that you've been in a mental health unit and you get under a section and then they remove the section and then you are discharged, it can feel like scary because you don't feel well, but actually compared to all the other people that they're seeing, and there's so many people that they're seeing, they're not actually abandoning you at all. They're just dealing with people who are even less well than you. And that's no comfort for you because you don't feel well. But it kind of explains that it's not because they think that you're really well, it's that they think you're functional. I've had this conversation with very close people to me who've been very suicidal, and because they have a supportive family, they haven't even been allowed to go into the mental health unit. So it doesn't matter that they're suicidal and they've acted on that suicidal ideation. The point is that when they did strategy, essentially, they could see that compared to the person next to them who'd arrived suicidal and having tried to take their own life, they essentially didn't have a supportive family, so they were more at risk, so they got the space. And that can feel so frustrating. So first of all, understand that I do connect with the fact that it's frustrating, but I also feel that instead of going, all right, this is therefore the only way out, that I acknowledge that I feel really depressed still, I feel really stressed, I haven't got the support, therefore suicide is an option. It's like, okay, that's really extreme. It's a really extreme option. And again, I'm not disrespecting you, and it's not my job to tell you what to do or what not to do. Of course it isn't, but it's really extreme. And there isn't just, I'm either involved in the mental health services or it's over. Again, that spectrum, it's profound, it's enormous. No one feels suicidal because they're not trying hard enough. Okay, no one. When you feel suicidal, it's because you feel like you've exhausted pretty much every single option that you've ever contemplated, and life feels exactly the same or worse, and you just want it to stop. It hurts, you want it to stop. So I get that, I get all of that. But I'm saying that's because the strategies that you've explored, they haven't been effective, and you've decided that they're probably the only ones that exist. And often that's because of the paradigm that we serve in our society, going, have you tried exercise? And no, don't get me wrong, all of these are really effective. So if you're listening to me and you haven't done this, and you need to do it anyway. So have you refined your diet? Have you got rid of the don't eat processed foods ideally. Do drink lots of water. Avoid alcohol. Avoid recreational drugs. Make sure that the meds that you're on, if you're on them, actually are effective and aren't making you less well than you would be without them, because we should always have these things looked at. Are you regularly getting yourself outside in nature, getting white light on your skin? Are you exercising in a way that really is motivating you to see that there are impacts on your body, that you're actually getting benefits from that? These are all things that you should be doing. Are you reaching out and talking to people that know you? Have you got support groups around you that you can join? These are all things that you should be doing and should have tried. If you haven't tried all of those, or aren't doing every single one of those at this moment in time, then you need to institute every single one of those that I've just said. It might sound overwhelming, but it really isn't, and it's completely possible for you to do that. But I'm going to just say to myself that you've done all that already, and that you've tried it, and you're eating a really healthy diet, you're exercising at least once a day, or having activity once a day, such as going out for a good 45 to 50 minute walk, that you are speaking to friends regularly, you've got support groups. If you've got that happening and it hasn't worked yet, okay, so then we have to move on, and we have to say, okay, well, maybe that's because that's not enough. So what else can we additionalise in? And in my experience, this is genuinely in my experience, one of the most key important threads that helps people become happy is taking on responsibilities of meaning. And it can be really weird when you feel depressed to have somebody go, well, what you need to do is more, because you're like, I really genuinely, to be getting out of bed makes me feel like I have to be a warrior. I get it. But I'm saying that what we have to do is see that we have impact on the world around us. It's why I volunteer still. It's one of the things that gives me the greatest meaning, is working for free in a field that I love and feel connected and committed to, with people that I feel a privilege to be around and that give me a sense of value, right? So I'm doing it for them, but I feel this reflection and it's really important to me. And it's not just about me, that I see that played out whenever I help people to understand the power of that. I don't know what it is within you. I don't know what passion you've got. For some people it'll be, I always wanted to be an actor. Well, you need to go and join an Am-Dram group, or you need to join your local choir. For some people it could be, I just want to feel a sense of connection and community. Don't even need to be religious, go and join a church. Believe me, you'll be accepted with open arms. You can be useful. Honestly, if you want to deal with depression, you have to come away from the I, and believe me, I'm not saying you're selfish, you're not. Look, I don't even know why I have to say that. You all know that I don't think anybody is selfish with any kind of mental health issue, but I always feel the need to, because there'll be some person watching this who wants to edit me and put it together in a way that seems like I'm doing that. So I always have to caveat that that's not what I'm saying. You know that I don't think you're selfish in any way, shape or form. But genuinely, if there is a thing that you can do, is that you kind of stop introspection, you stop looking at self, you stop looking at what's wrong with you, and you start going, how can I be of use here? And then everybody who you're being of use to, which there will be a multitude of people, because believe me, we've never needed more people to help in our society in a whole multitude of ways. Their eyes will give you a reflection that is so new. It will be overwhelming for you in the best possible way. And then that mental agony and torment will diminish to some degree. I'm not saying it will eradicate it. I'm not saying you won't have bad times. I'm saying if you haven't done what I've just said, all of those things, then you don't need a mental health nurse. You need all of those things. However, aside from that, I will always come back to this. If you feel you've done all of what I've just said and you're still at risk and you can't trust that you're in a situation where you can keep yourself safe, then you have an absolute right to go to A&E, and you do not move. Don't be agreeable. It's the worst trait to be in these circumstances, and you refuse and you just say, I'm not leaving care because I'm going to kill myself. And you let them know. It doesn't matter how much they cajole you. It doesn't matter how often they tell you, well, you know, we're very busy. It doesn't matter how you feel like you're being disregarded, because some people will do that. You just wait it out and you sit there until somebody finally says, we've got a bed for you. And at that point, you can relax a little bit into that, okay? So always prioritise the fact that if you feel at risk, if you think you're going to go ahead and do something that you definitely shouldn't do, there's a permanent solution to a temporary situation. Change happens. Change happens. We feel bad, we feel okay, we feel great, we feel terrible. It happens all the time. But if you feel really bad and you're really worried about that, you go and get that help, okay? That's what I'd say. Any tips with dealing with new calorie legislation when an eating disorder recovery? I mean, it's just a whole heap of stupid. Not you. The whole government thing. So let me get this right. The answer to the obesity epidemic in the Western world is that we should put calories on meals, but only if you have 250 or more staff. So if you just go to a local cafe, a brasserie, a little cake shop, you can just have a meal without a problem. But if you go to a chain, they're going to be whacking them in front of you so that you're aware of the calories. To be honest as well, McDonald's and Burger King have done that for a very long time anyway, and that's why I know how many calories are in their plant burgers, for example. The point is, it's nonsensical. And I'm going to tell you why it's massively nonsensical. Having specialised with eating disorders, my master's is on eating disorders, I have a great dedication to it because of personal experience as well as through my professional experience. But let me tell you, a calorie is not something we should consider. It is the type of thing that you eat that impacts on your body. Look, if you looked at my calorie count a day, I'd probably be eating more than pretty much most people who were going on an ordinary, what is it for women, 2,200 calorie diet, or 2,000 calorie, and guys 2,500. I can eat cashew nuts until I literally can physically not swallow them anymore because that's how hard they are to digest. And calorie-wise, I mean, like my body's on fire because I'm having something that's really hard to digest. It's massively high in fat, right? Okay, like another example that will just quantify this. If you've ever heard of the Atkins diet, I do not recommend it, guys, at all. Certainly, I would never eat it, but let's just throw it out there. If calories are the issue, right? With the Atkins diet, people, and I've watched them do this, believe me, they eat like 5 steaks, 20 sausages, 2 packs of ham, drink fresh cream, eat a block of cheese, lose weight. If you don't believe me, look it up. Their breath smells terrible and I don't want to think what happens when they go to the bathroom. But believe me, calories are where we've got confused. So when you're changing your mindset on an eating disorder, change your mindset on food. It's about health. You want to eat things that feel good for you. Look, I always used to say to people with bulimia, the great thing about you is you've got a mindset and a personality where you just want to have it all. You want everything, but you don't want the consequences negatively. You want everything, but you want things to look okay, right? But if you change your mindset and you're like, well, I'm somebody who wants to experience the world, I want to be full of new opportunities, I want to try everything unashamedly, unapologetically. I don't know who I am yet, but I'm going to find that out. That's like the bulimic personality. And if you just transition that and focus it on other things like ambition or meeting new people and socializing, all those things, not concentrating on the body, it's fleeting, it's always dying, that's what happens in the end. The body should be kept healthy and fit, and that's it. We shouldn't be worrying about being skinny. That's not healthy, right? So the bulimic wants all of that, and the anorexic, she's determined or he's determined, committed to a cause to a point where they'll die for it. Like there is nothing steelier than an anorexic's attitude, right? That personality in the corporate world would make you prime minister. Why are you wasting your time on calories when you have this capacity within you? A capacity so powerful, so engaging, so capable that you will literally take over corporate entities if you just allow yourself to concentrate your focus on the areas that will have positive impact. So, some of the greatest personal fitness trainers I've worked with have had anorexia or bulimia in the past, and they've just switched onto health. They don't weigh themselves. They certainly don't count calories. They eat what's good for them. They tend to stick to like the few ingredients rule, such as you don't eat processed food unless it's going out to a restaurant and you can't avoid it, and then you just eat whatever you want because it tastes good and you like it. That's the rule there. Eat till you're content. When it comes down to what you do at home, you eat healthy, nutritious, homely, really great things that you feel a connection with. Lots of vegetables, lots of nutritious greens, lots of nuts and seeds and pulses, and you don't get stuck on calories. So when it comes down to those, if you've got more than 250 people working in your chain of restaurants, we've got to tell you that your Big Mac and fries is going to be like 935 calories. You're not going to be eating there all the time. Don't eat there at all if you don't want to. But the calorie is not defining good or bad. The calorie is just this bizarre mark that somebody decided was how we measure what we should put in our body, which I guarantee you wouldn't see me eating, because I literally love nuts, love pulses. I love cashews and Brazils and walnuts full of oil. I live on olive oil. Love it. Calories wise, I'm doomed. But I'm really healthy, and I haven't got loads of weight on me. And it comes down to understanding what food is good for you. Like, if there's one bit of advice I give to anorexics and bulimics, and even people with binge eating disorder, and people who are, dealing with obesity, like, the calories are just like a trap. Like, you've got to start being intuitive about what's right for your body. Sorry, I could go on about that for like 3.5 years, and I still wouldn't have finished, because there's so much. But the biggest rule I have, like, in my house, nowhere in this house is there a pair of scales. There will never be a pair of scales, well, apart from the ones that I measure food out for cooking, because obviously you need to know how much flour to put in stuff. But that's it. There are no scales in this house, and never will be. Don't need them. At the end of the day, eat what you want, when you want, how you want, but try to make sure that you don't eat loads of processed food. And like I said, when it comes down to the stupid idea that they've got about that making a difference, like, if that made a difference, we'd all be very slim. People have had the calories on things forever. It's like, get calorie blind, We know what's good for us. We know what's not great for us. Have lots of what's good for us, limit what's not so great for us, but never think that any food is bad. Just see some foods as being better most of the time, and others being something we should just have on occasion. Like I always say, anybody here, I love a vegan burger. When I make a vegan burger, my husband will attest, it is stacked that high. There is a lot of fake things, like fake bacon. Who knew? There is fake cheese, there's fake mayonnaise, full fat. There is a lot of gherkins and anything else that I can put on there. Fried what? Fried onions, red usually, a bit caramelised if I'm honest. The point is, it's like that. With chips, more mayo, a lot of ketchup, right? It's totally unhealthy. I only have it once a month or so, but I really enjoy it, and I stop eating it when I'm full. Learn to be intuitive. It's a powerful exercise, but I totally understand it. I'm saying that to any of you with eating disorders, don't think I underestimate. I can remember the panic more than people who have never been in that space can ever understand. I can remember being able to go into a supermarket and I could reel off the caloric value of pretty much everything on the shelves. Everything. I've been in that space. What a waste of my life. Women, men are more than bodies, and we have to stop believing that we're measured that way. I will see you next week, or Wednesday for those of you. Yeah, no, I'm here Wednesday. Sorry, I'm down in Plymouth. If any of you are from Plymouth, I'm there on Thursday. It's a long drive. Maybe somebody could come and bring me refreshments. I might need it by the time I arrive. Take care, and I'll see you on Wednesday if you come to my crime stuff. Take care, guys.